like most of my other lessons, this one is based generally on the textbook, but it's just an overview, and so there's a lot of additional information in the chapter on persuasive presentations that you really need to spend some time with. This is particularly important because there are a lot of ways you can go with a persuasive presentation, and what I'm going to be going through is really just going to skim the surface. There are a lot of options for you, a lot of ways to go, a lot of interesting methods, none of which is necessarily precisely right or wrong, but if you just try to wing it, you're going to find yourself kind of going in circles. So here's an overview of how to begin working on your persuasive presentation. All right, so the first thing you're going to start with is, what is your proposition? What do you want to claim? What's your destination for this presentation? Where do you want people to end up? And there are a couple of really important things to consider here. One of them is it's got to be fact-based. So if your proposition is the world's flat, if your proposition is we are surrounded by zombies, don't go there. Don't do that. Go with a fact-based proposition. If you believe in zombies, or if you believe the world is flat and you want to go there, you're going to flunk this assignment, but probably we have bigger issues to talk about. So seriously, come up with a proposition that you can defend using facts, and then we're going to talk about how to add to your presentation to make your case, to deliver a presentation that might nudge a few people. Let's just say I wanted to give you a persuasive presentation with the proposition that Idaho needs to preserve more water. Okay, let's just start with that. Where I would start is basic research that indicates that eastern Idaho gets about 13 inches of rainfall or total precipitation a year. That qualifies it as a desert. If you go outside the areas that are irrigated, so if you as you're driving along the freeway and you see in the summer beautiful green potato fields or barley fields, or if you drive into a city and you see tall trees, those are not here naturally. When you get out into the area that is still natural, it's sagebrush. So we have created this area, this place where we grow a lot of things where we can live, by pulling water out of the ground, by storing water in reservoirs that captures snow melt, and for use when we need it. As we have more people, as we have more demands, we want to use more water. And unfortunately, a lot of our water goes for uses such as green grass. Well, you know what? Green grass probably makes no sense in eastern Idaho because we're pouring a lot of water on something that isn't naturally here. If we're going to pour water on something that isn't natural to our environment, let's make it potatoes. This is the kind of thing that I would start with to make my case for this proposition that Idaho needs to preserve more water. I think there's a factual basis for it, and then I can go into a point-by-point discussion of it, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment. Here's something to remember. Your textbook talks about this in more detail. You're not going to be able to convince people from one extreme to the other in a 5 to 7 minute presentation. You're not going to take, a flat earther and turn them into a believer in a round earth in 5 to 7 minutes. If you can, either you're a genius, which maybe you are, or the person you're talking to isn't stable, and they're going to swing right back when they hear the next person. So what we're trying to do is move people a notch or two along this continuum. That's your objective, not to go from standing still to light speed, in a matter of 1 5-minute presentation. So that's your goal. Nudge people along. Why is this so hard? Because we human beings do not like change. I don't like change. You don't like change. Change is stressful. There is great research that shows the emotional well-being of people reduces based on the amount of change they're experiencing at a given time. So if you are experiencing in your life, and we have all been there, some of us are maybe there right now, a death in the family, a marriage or divorce. It can be positive change. It's still change and it's still stressful. Moving from one place to another. These kinds of things, a change in a job, these kinds of things, even if they're positive, cause stress. And so we are predisposed to fight change. We don't embrace it, particularly if we're already stressed. So this is why a persuasive presentation is such a challenge. Even a bigger deal is this idea of cognitive dissonance. What that means is we all have beliefs, and we hold to them pretty tightly. And sometimes we come into contact with facts that go against our beliefs. Well, we are predisposed to reject the facts and cling to our beliefs, because if we change our beliefs, we encounter stress. And so when you are trying to persuade somebody of something, one of the reasons why it's so difficult is they may hold beliefs that run counter to what you're trying to persuade them about, and they intuitively understand that accepting your position and changing their belief is going to cause them stress. And this is why we hold tight to our beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming factual evidence against them. This is also why conspiracy theories have been around as long as people, because we create conspiracy theories to justify beliefs that aren't based in fact. It's a whole other lesson for another time. But the bottom line here is just presenting a logical argument, making a logical case, usually isn't going to get you there. All right, so what do we do? So the textbook goes into this in a lot more detail, and there are a lot of ways to go about making your case. And so I'm not going to go into the entire set of steps that you can choose from. These are well detailed in the textbook, but here's one idea. First of all, you take it a step at a time. The old story, you don't eat an elephant in one bite. Well, that's a dumb analogy, because who wants to eat an elephant? But you get the point. Another approach is what is referred to in public speaking as the two tails approach. So you take a reasonable argument against the position that you want to convince people of, and then you refute it. What this is not is the straw man approach. The straw man approach, you see this in politics all the time. The straw man approach is you misstate the objections to the position you're taking. You make it sound more extreme than it is. You misrepresent people who are opposing you, and then you knock that down. You take an extreme position, and then you knock it down. Well, that's easy. What you want to do is take a more reasonable argument against the position you're taking and deal with that. So it's not the straw man approach, it's using the two-tail approach. And again, your textbook goes into more detail on how this works. All right, we're just about to wrap up here. One of the ancient approaches to persuasion, been around since the ancient Greeks, is this idea of ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is, we have already talked about this without using these terms. Ethos is establishing your credibility with your audience. Show that you've done the research. Show that you know your topic. Show that you've done the homework to establish trust and credibility. Pathos, and one of the great users of pathos in American history, of course, was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and his I Have a Dream speech is the most profound example of this. He doesn't create a fantasy where we can imagine it. He creates aspirations. This is where we want to be. This is where we want to be as people. And then he appeals to our positive emotions to cause us to want to be with him and to get there. And that can be very powerful, but it's not enough. We also need to use facts. We need to be logical in our approach. And so if we combine these three things, and again, I'll just reiterate this, the textbook goes into a lot more detail on the ways you can use this, the ways you can build out an outline. The outline you create for this is going to look very similar to the outline you created for your informative presentation. It's just going to have perhaps some additional steps, and you're shooting for a different kind of outcome. But the basic idea is very similar. And as I said, the textbook goes into this in more detail and does a nice job of laying it out step by step. So again, this really is an informative presentation on steroids. You're going to take the same basic approach, but your destination is different. Instead of just going away having taught people about something that they may not have known about, you're going to attempt to persuade them at least a little bit. And your objective is, if at the end of your presentation there are members of your audience who say, I had never thought about that, or I want to look into that more, that's a win. Then now you've gotten people to at least open up their thinking a little bit. You're not going to convince a room full of people in one 5-minute presentation to go from one place to another in that time. But if you can open some minds, you have succeeded. So now go into the textbook, read the chapter on persuasive presentations, really embrace it, and start to put together your informative presentation plus to get to a persuasive argument.